You're listening to Beyond Technique, the podcast that empowers photographers to bring their businesses to the next level. Hello and welcome to Beyond Technique, brought to you by Platypod, Photo Focus, and Skip Cohen University. This is Shamira Young, and I'm joined by my co-host who can make any mask look amazing, Skip Cohen. Skip, how are you?
Oh my God, that is so scary because we're all wearing masks. And the other day I was in the market and some neighbor of mine said hello, and I still don't know which neighbor it is. The masks, they're
Right?
really creating a challenge. Now, if I'd stayed long enough, I would have figured it out, I think. But I did see on Etsy, by the way, somebody offers a mask where they actually print that missing part of your face over the mask.
Nice.
So when you put on the mask, it does look like your full face. So, yes, I guess I can wear a mask.
Oh.
Hey, Shamira, it's my Hey Shamira minute here.
I love it.
Let's talk about some new things with Platypod.
Yeah.
Because I don't think people realize that not only does a Platypod change your perspective with a camera, but it's got some other applications. And since I just changed my whole webcam setup, let's talk about it. Sound like a plan here?
Oh, let's do it. Let's do
Well,
it.
I watched the JP Morgan video where JP talks about, in fact, the tagline at the front just says, your light sucks. And he's got good light and bad light. So I've actually followed almost item per item of what he suggested. And I started by raising my laptop up. Then I took a Platypod Max. I've got two goosenecks stacked on either side. I've got one has got the Lytra Pro on one side, and on the right side it's got just a Lytra Torch. Then I went ahead and took another Max and two goosenecks. This is just a great way to be able to change how I'm presenting myself. And also my lighting now is really good, and these little Lytras put out the same kind of quality light, if not better. I mean, I've got a couple of soft boxes here I've used over the years, and there's just no reason. These are just terrific. They're small, they're easy to move around, and all of a sudden, the quality of anything I do when I've got to be on video is just 10 times better.
You know, that's so great, Skip, because now is absolutely the time for us to really revamp our video setup. I mean, we're all having meetings, or if you're doing video podcasts, or even teaching educational workshops for other photographers, you absolutely want to look great on video. So I think that is pretty darn cool, for sure.
Just about everybody listening to our podcast is either a professional photographer or they're aspiring to be one. Well, the quality and the way you present yourself on camera is just as important on a webcam as that headshot you've got on your website. You might as well look as professional as you can and really present yourself in a great way.
For sure. For sure. Cool. So let's get to our program today. We have an amazing guest lined up.
We've got a great program today. And just to remind everybody, when Shamira and I relaunched this series last year, we wanted to go beyond talking about business and marketing and really step away from talking about any specific techniques in processing images, for example. Well, I'm really excited about today's topic and our guest. We've got Mike Peters in the house, and there's probably nothing Mike can't photograph, but his passion is street photography. And it's a topic we've never really discussed much with past guests. So Mike's also a testimonial to one of the most fun aspects of this industry, which is all about the friendships. Mike and I met through Panasonic's Lumix Ambassador program, and I'm a big fan of his work. I want to read the first sentence of his About page, which I also shared earlier this week in a blog post with one of his images. Quote, I believe that all photographs should make a connection so that you, the viewer, can feel something familiar or imagine a story about the photograph, close quote. Well, to me, Mike is the ultimate storyteller, capturing our imagination and the personality of the subject with just one image. And it's a skill set that goes far beyond the technique of just pointing your camera and clicking the shutter. So if a picture's worth 1,000 words, then Mike's written volumes. Mike, I hope I didn't screw something up in technology here. This is going to be the cue for your lips to move. Welcome to Beyond Technique.
Thank you, Skip, very much. I really appreciate being here and being asked to do this. This is a great opportunity.
Yeah, I always panic when I go to intro a guest. Someday somebody's going to set me up and just sit there in silence and let me think I did do something wrong here, even though Shamara is at the controls.
Well, I'm trying not to just nod my head, so
that works.
Well, Mike, we're so excited to have you, and your work is really, really great and so relevant. Looking on your homepage of just the way you are documenting history, this unprecedented history right now. And it's so cool to see you getting out there and shooting and telling people stories. And so this is going to be an amazing interview. But our favorite first question that we like to launch things off with, can you tell us your background and how you got started and how you ended up doing what you're doing today?
Well, it's sort of a long, boring story, but I guess I'll tell it anyway. I was actually, I grew up in a sort of a very working class town, and spent my early years going to Catholic school where they didn't really believe in art unless you were drawing pictures of God or Jesus. And so I didn't really have much of a background in art at all. And when I was in high school, I attempted very poorly to play football and wound up getting injured. And that was the best thing that ever happened to me because one day I was standing on the sideline in a game, and one of my other students came to the game with a camera, and he was photographing for the yearbook. And I remember he had a Minolta SRT 101, and he had a zoom lens on it. And he put it up to my eye, and he said, "Watch this." And he zoomed in, and I was like, "Whoa, this is great." So from there, I got interested in photography. Mostly because it was cool. And I got a job in the summer and made enough money to buy a camera, and I bought myself an Olympus OM1. In the meanwhile, I had borrowed my uncle's Voigtlander and started making pictures and started reading photography magazines. And every free moment that I had, I would spend in the school library reading modern photography and popular photography and all of those great old, now defunct magazines. And it was a bit of an education. And my junior year in high school, I decided that I wanted to be a professional photographer. I had picked up a book on freelance photography, and I wound up going to the Fashion Institute of Technology, where I majored in photography for 2 years, and got my associate's degree and got a job working at Tiffany's in their studio and photographing watches and cufflinks and rings and diamond jewelry and plates and everything you can imagine. And I really didn't like it because I really wanted to photograph people. So I lasted about 6 months and then started freelancing and did a lot of assisting at the time, worked for a bunch of commercial photographers. And I had met a photographer who was shooting for Architectural Digest while I was working at Tiffany's, and they had sent us around the country photographing in really rich people's homes their table settings for a book that Tiffany's was putting out on table settings. And so we continued to work together after I left Tiffany's, and I started getting other assignments and started doing some editorial work for some magazines. One of the earliest and most interesting and probably formative images that I made that first year after I left Tiffany's was I had to photograph the artist Alice Neal. And at the time, I was 20 years old. I knew nothing of Alice Neal because I knew nothing about art really, except for the big shots. But then once I was in the presence of her work in her apartment, I was just completely and utterly blown away by the images that she created. She painted portraits in a very different style. Not, you wouldn't call it like photorealistic or realistic in any way, but it was. She has a very distinct style, and she managed to capture something, an essence of the sitter that I I couldn't comprehend at the time, and I couldn't understand what it was, but it just left me feeling, I don't know, it left me feeling confused, really. I was just like, wow, what is this? There's something powerful here. And a couple hours later, she came out for me to photograph her, and she was just like this incredible woman. Um, I think she had just rolled out of bed. She was wearing her black negligee, and she had her, cup of coffee with her. And she was, at that time, she was probably in her 70s. And she was just magnificent. And I did a photograph of her in a study, and then also in her studio. And, and I began to learn a little bit more about her. And really, she was such an intense influence on my work about making portraits and about photographing people. And of course, I knew the usual people like, you know, Diane Arbus and Cartier-Bresson and Gene Smith and I don't know, lots of different people. Avedon. I have a lot of influences. Walker Evans, but she struck a different chord in me. Sort of a very similar feeling as to what I get from Arbus and Avedon's personal work. So there's just a real sort of like, they sort of look beneath the surface and they sort of unmask people in a way, which is sort of what I'm trying to do a little bit. So, I continue to do commercial work. I've always made my living in photography. I wind up doing newspaper work and then corporate editorial work and magazine stuff. And then in 2000, I wound up getting a job at a university here in New Jersey. And after 20 years of freelancing, it was nice to finally get a full-time gig with a regular paycheck and retirement and health benefits. And that's been really fun too, because I'm surrounded by a very diverse group of people, really interesting people, students and professors and my colleagues there, and they're very supportive. And, I get to basically do things as I see them. And since I was the first photographer there, I really got to define their visual style, which has been sort of very gratifying too. So, so that's my background. It's sort of long and varied, but I've done a lot of interesting things, and I've met a lot of interesting people.
A lot of people, especially young photographers today, who don't have the foundation yet, and will get with over time. But when you were talking about how you got started, and I was sitting here and I was thinking about my first real camera, which was the same Minolta. Then I was thinking your comment about football and Dennis Reggie, who is one of the most recognized wedding photographers in the world, and took all those images of all the Kennedy weddings over the years.
Sure.
Also had an injury. If I remember right, it was a football injury, and the coach said, "Come on, I want you still with the team. Here's a camera." And that was where he started. And then you hit on modern and pop, and Steve Rosenbaum, who is a very good friend today and is a publicist and has a great agency that I worked with over the years. He was originally, when I started Hasselblad, he was the publisher of Modern, and then Popular Photography bought Modern out and blended in their subscriber list and dropped the magazine. And it's just interesting that there's so many areas in this industry where people's paths have crossed. And that's one of the things that I always try and remind younger photographers today, that when you go to a show, network as much as you can, meet everybody you can, talk to the person on your left and your right. And I guess I've gotten off the track a little bit, but it's that common denominator of all of us having a love for the craft, and you got to share it. And share it with each other, watch each other's backs, and everything else. I didn't mean to get off track, you two. Let's get right into street photography. And I guess the best place to start would be what's going through your head when you start to when you go out, and like most recently, you've gone to a lot of of protests, and there's a lot going on right now outdoors. Unfortunately, sometimes it's the only thing going on outside, because we've gone through a stretch now over the last 4 months where you don't have a lot of people out there on the street. It's hard to do street photography when the streets look like a ghost town, especially in the New York area. What are some of the things that you think about that when you're heading out? What are you planning on looking for? What gear do you like to take? What's the game plan as you start to head out, and this is what I want to shoot today?
Okay, well, the thing is that there is no game plan. I just decide where I'm going to go, and then the rest of it is, I basically go out. I try to go out with as empty a head as possible. I try not to go out with a plan, because I find that if I go out with a plan, I tend to look for images that are part of the plan, which basically then excludes me from finding other images that are not part of the plan. And often, or I would say 99.9% of the time, the images that are not part of the plan are always the better images than the plan. When I was younger, I used to go out with images in my head and I'd never find them. But, I would walk by, amazing things, and I just never realized it because, I wasn't thinking about that. So I learned to try to have a sort of a very Zen-like approach to going out, and just being open to what's there, and to being sensitive to what's in front of me, and not being too specific about what I'm looking for, or not being specific at all. So I just try to keep it really simple. My job is very specific. I'm often sent out to photograph a specific person in a specific situation for a specific use. And one of the things I try to do with my personal photography is to not burden it with have-tos, or it's just purely want to. I want to be out there. I want to be bearing witness to what's going on. And I don't want to have to do anything. I want to just go out and sort of like allow myself to sort of become immersed in the moment, and just let myself be affected by what I see. So, and that's really sort of, that's my approach. Is just pick a destination and go there, and just try to keep the rest of it really simple. In terms of gear, my all of my commercial work is shot on a rectangle. These days, either 4:3 or 16:9. And I started shooting square back in 2000. I decided that I was going to start. I was changing over from shooting 4x5 for most of my personal work up until then to, at that point, I went into medium format, and I decided that square was really where I wanted to go. And when I stopped using film and switched over to digital, one of the appeals of the Lumix system was that I could still choose a square aspect ratio and see it in the camera. And so I'll choose a camera set to a square crop, and my favorite lens is the 25, which is the normal lens for the camera. But I'll also bring a 15 and a 42.5 just in case. But I rarely use the others. I'm mostly using the 25 because I find that I like to be close to people, and I like to be in conversational distance when I make photographs. And I find that the 25 allows me to do that. It allows me to be close, but not up people's noses like a wide angle would. Some guys go out there and they stick their camera 18 inches away from somebody's face. That's not my thing, but it's with a wide angle lens, and I prefer to be a little bit more just not be in people's faces quite as much.
Mm-hmm.
No.
You know, that brings up a very interesting point, Mike. You mentioned that you like to be close to people and conversational, but still a respectable distance. But,
Right.
you know, watching the news and hearing stories of the violence that can happen at protests, not at every protest, but still personal safety is something that everyone is kind of hyper aware of today. And so my question to you is, how do you stay safe? Are there certain precautions that you take, or are you just respectful to everyone so that they respect you back?
Well, I think it's important to be respectful to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sometimes, you know, I try to be very open about what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm usually going out with 3 cameras with 3 lenses, one on each camera. So it's obvious I'm there to take photographs. And, you know, I try to make eye contact with people and smile, although nobody can see my smile with the mask on anymore, but they can see my eyes, smiles.
Right, exactly.
You know, a little nod of the head. Just there's always a way that you can sort of create a rapport with somebody, even if you don't have to say a word. You know, you just a nod of the head, you know, tilt of the head, whatever. People get what you're doing. You know, I find that being respectful to everyone is really important, and that's why I like to make connections with people, because, you know, it's I don't want to make people into caricatures. I want their humanity to be able to sort of ring through the picture and not just reduce them to a 2-dimensional character.
Absolutely.
Great stuff here. Let's talk about usage rights. What I have no idea what is and isn't an issue these days, but you're capturing an image of somebody. You're later, it might be published, it might not be published. What are some of the issues you've run into with usage rights, and do you need to do model releases? What's the scoop on that side of the business?
Well, if you're photographing somebody on the street, they're in a public place, and you can photograph them however you like. You can publish the pictures as your own artwork, or in part of a publication, maybe to publicize a story or to publicize your artwork, or, you know, as a documentary image of a particular thing that was happening. One of the things that you can't do is to sell the image for advertising or marketing by a third party. You can't misrepresent what's in the image, or, you know, you know, sell it for advertising. There was a very important case settled probably about 15 years ago. The photographer Philip Lorca de Corsia had photographed back in the 90s a series of portraits on the streets of Manhattan, and one of the gentlemen that he photographed was from a Jewish sect where they do not allow for graven images or their images to be used in any way. And Philip was here selling a picture of this gentleman in a gallery for $15,000, and he had sold numerous prints, and so he was sued. And if you look it up, it's Nuziwig versus de Corsia. And it was settled that indeed, you know, Philip could photograph this guy because he was in public, and in public there is no expectation of privacy. And because he wasn't selling it for advertising, he was only selling it as his artwork. He could sell it as much as he wanted. So, fortunately, you know, that case law is settled, and it's really not an issue at this point, unless something changes in the American Constitution. And at this point, anything's possible. But, you know, who knows? There are some countries in Europe where, I think in France and Germany, you can't photograph strangers on the street and do anything with them. And if you do, you can get sued. but in this country, it's still you can still do that.
Wow.
So I don't ever get model releases because that would, it's. I mean, that would it would completely destroy the flow of what I'm doing, and it'd be so disruptive to people, especially at a demonstration. No one's going to stop and give me a model release, or if I see somebody on the street and make a quick photograph, they might not even know that I photographed them. So I'm running after them and say, "Hey, sign this." That's not going to happen.
Have you ever had people contact you after the shot and say, "Wow, I didn't know you took it"? I'm talking about the nice side of this.
There was I guess it was in 2004 or 5 or 6 or something like that. I photographed a gentleman on 34th Street, across the street from Macy's, and I had seen him coming, walking towards me from, I don't know, maybe 50 yards away, and he looked really tired, but he had on this great American flag tie, and behind him in the background on the facade of Macy's was just a whole line of American flags. So I was standing against a subway exit, and I waited for him to walk past where I was standing. And at the time, I was shooting with a Hasselblad, a 2003, 2003 Hasselblad, CW,
Yep.
And I had on my trusty 50 millimeter f2.8 lens, and I had pre-focused it to a certain point, and I had one shot, and he hit the mark. I hit the shutter, and he kept going. And as he walked past me, he said, "Sorry," because in the moment that he walked by and I pressed the shutter, he lifted up his hand and gave me the finger. So it was a sort of a classic New York shot. It's on my website. And at around that time, this magazine came out called JPEG. And so I submitted the photo to JPEG, and they published it. And I got an email, I don't know, probably I guess about a year after I took the picture, from this guy who said, "You're in big trouble. That's my friend's father." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I said, "That's your friend's father?" I said, "That's great. I'd love to have his contact information. Can you give me his email address?" So I got the guy's email address. I sent him an email, and I thanked him so much for flipping me the bird, and for the picture. And then I sent him a print, and he turned out to be a really nice guy. We spoke over the phone, and as it turns out, he was a bus driver from Albany, and he led tours into New York City from people from upstate, and he just dropped off a bunch of people, and he was walking along, going to eat his lunch. And so that's what he was doing that day. And he was tired. And it was hot, and he was, it was just like one of those days where, just sort of like saps everything out of you. And but we had a great conversation. He was the nicest guy.
That's so cool. I love that you're touching on things on, I guess you'd call it soft skills, or just being a decent person with your photography business, especially street photography. I think it's so easy for people to get caught up in what editing software they should use or the settings on the camera. And while that's all important, it's equally important knowing how to be respectful to people, like you talked about, or reaching out to this guy and sending him a print and turning a potentially negative situation into a really positive one. That's very, very cool, and kind of leads me to my next question. So with spur of the moment things happening when you're out in the field with street photography, have you encountered any challenges with street photography that you didn't foresee but kind of had to handle when you're out shooting, or any stories or anything like that?
Well, I had a situation, I don't know, again, I guess at this point, probably about 18 or 19 years ago, where there were some guys protesting on the street, and, I photographed one of them, and one of his friends got in my face and said, "You can't photograph, and
Mm.
you're not allowed. You have to ask permission." And I said, I was very calm, and I stood there, and I smiled, and I said, "Well, thanks, but actually, I really don't have to ask permission. But if he doesn't want me to photograph him, then, in this case, I'll just won't photograph him because, frankly, I don't find him that interesting anyway." But this guy was like right in my face, and I was like, I don't see any cops around, so I'm just gonna, just defer and sort of like move away. But then other times, you know, I had the very first selfie stick I saw. Okay, was I guess this guy from, I think he was from Hong Kong or something. He was a tourist in the city, and I was in Bryant Park, and I'd never seen a selfie stick before. And he had a selfie stick, and he's taking selfies, and I photographed him. And he got my face, and he said, "You can't do that. You have to ask permission." I said, "Oh, no, actually, I don't. It's actually." I said, "Where are you from?" He said, "Well, I'm from Hong Kong." I said, "Well, in Hong Kong, maybe you have to ask permission, but here, actually, you don't. You're in public." So I explained it to him, and he was like, "Okay, all right, that's fine." I had the picture already, so wasn't really worried about it. But I find that the most important thing you can do is to not sort of run away, and not get belligerent with people. But it's also important to stand your ground and say, actually, I do have the right to be here, and I'm not trying to hide what I'm doing, and I'm not doing anything wrong. And if people question that, I give them my card and I say, "Here, look at my website. If you have any questions, you can email me, you can call me, but see the work that I do." Um, it's I find that anytime somebody confronts you, it's really important to stand there and listen to them. And sometimes if they say no, then it's no. And sometimes if you already have the picture, then you have the picture and you don't worry about it. But sometimes you have to just let people go on and then just be very nice and say, "Well, yes, that's not the case." Um, and it's an adventure every time you go out because you never know what's going to happen.
I wish I could remember who the photojournalist was, but somewhere over the last 5 to 10 years, um, there was a photojournalist who talked about the images that he didn't take over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And he was sent out to document the pain of a flood, famine, something, somewhere in the world. And there was a phenomenal image of a woman who had just lost her family.
Mm.
And it was suggested that he take that shot, and he chose not to.
Right.
And he said there are times when there are images that you just need to respect the privacy of the individual. And that was the extreme case. But I remember being so touched by the fact that, this might have been his Pulitzer, and chose absolutely nope.
Well,
I'm not going to click the shutter on this one.
yeah, I agree with that. One of the things that I don't do is I don't photograph homeless people asleep or incapacitated, or people who appear to be suffering from as a mental illness of some sort, only because it's just not right. A homeless person sleeping on the street, it's like invading their home, and or somebody who is really in a very vulnerable position. I don't know that it doesn't really do anything to help the person. Um, it's not like I'm working. I'm not Lewis Hine. I'm not. I don't have an outlet for my work where I can show the outrage. Um, so I just refrain from doing stuff like that, only because it is sort of an invasion, and the street is their home, and so I tend to not take those photos. Just as a sign of respect more than anything. It's not that I don't think it's important to photograph them. I think it's important that people understand what they're going through. But there's a time and a place. And if I feel like the time and the place that I'm in isn't right or wouldn't be respectful, then I just won't do it.
It's that the key word there is respectful.
Yeah.
Hey, we're almost out of time, and before Shamara hits you with our usual last question, I'm just curious, how big are your archives and how are they stored? And I know that's a pure technique question, but at this point in your life, I'm imagining just a monster archive.
Yeah, I have film going back to the mid 70s when I first started. And it's all in like banker's boxes, actually, separated by year. And, it's not very well, very well cataloged at all. And I'm actually ever so slowly going through, negatives, glassine envelopes with negatives in them where I've written down a basic date or some information, and I'm starting to scan them. Actually, scanning them with the Lumix G9 in the high res mode, using the Olympus macro lens, and I have this thing called the film toaster, and I can put the film in there and get an image that fills up the screen, and it's huge. It's like 10,000 pixels wide, and I can make beautiful scans, much better than I could with my an old Imicon scanner that I actually had at my disposal at one point. So it's really so everything is kept sort of in dry storage, and I just take a box at a time and I go through it and I scan it and then I put the box back and I take another box.
Sounds like a process.
Yeah, it's fun, but it's a lot of work. So I wasn't, unfortunately, very organized when it came to storing stuff, but remarkably, I can still put my hands on things if I know what I'm looking for.
Wow.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
And, for our favorite final question, although you've given so much great advice and relevant advice with what's going on today with street photography, but we do like to make sure and ask, what's your advice for photographers who are just starting out today?
Well, I think that the most important thing is to follow your interests and to be absolutely relentless about making photographs that are meaningful to you. I work for a living and I take photographs all week long for other people. And, and I've been doing this now for 40 years. And in all of those 40 years, I always had personal projects going on that were always important to me. And I tell people that if you're not photographing the things that are just really you're really passionate about, then you should really think about what you can do to change that, because being passionate about your subject matter is I think the most important thing that you can do as a photographer, and it'll make you work harder to make images that satisfy you and only you. And you can't really, it's important to please other people, to make, it's nice when people like your work. Like, I really appreciate it when somebody tells me how much, they like my work and how much it means to them. But first and foremost, I have to please my own self and do work that I feel good about. And just sort of hope that it sort of resonates with other people. Fortunately, when I work for other people, when I do commercial work, I get that in the form of a check. And sometimes they're really nice about it, and they say nice things. Sometimes you don't never hear back from the client, in terms of like whether or not they like the picture. But as long as I pay the bill, that's all that matters. But with the personal work, I like to put it out there, and I put it out on social media, which is a real wonder these days, because back before social media, all my personal work lived in banker's boxes in a closet, and so it's nice to get some feedback and get some exposure, and then have somebody like Skip discover my work and have me on a podcast. So so follow your passion and just be relentless about photographing things that you really care about.
There's a comment that I made a few years back, and I said, you can't create images that tug at people's heartstrings if your own heart isn't in it. And that's where I found that you, Mike, and so many photographers that you and I share as friends, the common denominator is the fact that everybody's heart is in it.
Right.
Big time.
Yeah, and you can tell right away people who are just there for other reasons, So yeah, you can see work right away that has people's passion as part of it. So it's nice when you come across like-minded fools.
That's what I refer to as the knuckleheads of the industry, and I use that as the compliment.
All right. Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Oh, Mike, we want to definitely post a link to your website online. Where can folks find you?
Okay, I'm at mikepeters-photography.com. And if you go there, that's my whole website. And then there I also have links to my social media. My Instagram is Mike Peters Photo. It's photo, F-O-T-O. It's all one word. And so that's where I live.
Perfect. We'll make sure to include that in the show notes. And Skip, where can folks find you?
It's always the same. Everything I write is at skipcohenuniversity.com, and I'm Skip Cohen on Facebook and Skip Cohen on Twitter. And I always give everybody my email address of skip@mei500.com because we want feedback, good or bad, or questions or guest ideas that you might have, or just suggestions about topics. And as I always ask again, where are they going to find you, Shamira?
Yes, they can send me an email at shamira@photofocus.com. That is my first name, CHAMIRA @photofocus.com. We love getting your questions, your ideas, your feedback, because it shapes how we move forward with this show and even who we have on the show and our amazing guests. And with that said, Mike, we want to thank you again. You gave really awesome, relevant
Great stuff,
tips.
Mike.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And we want to thank our listeners for joining us as well. Please tell your friends about this podcast, especially if they have the desire to improve their photography business. We look forward to having you with us next time on Beyond Technique, brought to you by Platypod, Photo Focus, and Skip Cohen University.